Hello, everyone, and I'm so glad to have you on the line today. Our webinar today is on tailspin management, where we're going to be focusing on giving you some good information on how your organization can better save money through managing your tailspin. I'm Lyria Charles, and I am going to be your moderator for today. And before I introduce our esteemed speaker, Avis Yates Rivers, I'd like to take care of a couple things, starting with telling you a little bit about myself. I am Chief of Staff at Technology Concepts Group, and I report to Avis Yates
Maya.
Rivers.
Good evening, Maya.
My background includes over 20 years in IT, with the last 10 years in executive leadership roles. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our esteemed speaker, Avis Yates Rivers, and I'd like to introduce her by letting you know a little bit about Avis. Avis is a 30-year technology entrepreneur, as she likes to call herself, a serial entrepreneur. She's got a strong background and is an industry expert in the areas of IT asset management and IT procurement. She's a strong advocate for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and also a major proponent of making sure that companies are utilizing the diversity and innovation from their diverse supplier platform. Avis is the recipient of numerous awards and recognitions, and she was recently named White House Champion of Change in STEM. In fact, she had a pretty exciting thing happen to her earlier this year where she was invited to go to Portugal to speak to a major international conference on the importance of diversity in information technology. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Avis Yates Rivers, CEO of Technology Concepts Group International.
Thank you, Lyria. I have stood up to take my bow. Thank you so much for that great introduction. I do so appreciate it. And I'm so excited that we have all come together to talk about what I think is a very, very important topic, and that is how to save money. I don't know about you, but I am always looking for opportunities in doing things more efficiently and saving money as a result. So we're going to move right on into our presentation, and I'm hopeful that today's session is going to be very, very educational and informative. I'm sure with some of the skills on this call that this will be just a refresher for you, but for others it may be the first time that you're actually interacting with some of these tailspin pieces of information. So why don't we start off by making sure that we're all on the same page and that we all know what tailspin is. And so for the purpose of today's discussion, these are the ways that I'm going to describe tailspin management. Number one, it's any spend that happens within your organization that is not strategically managed by those experts in procurement. And so this is purchases that may happen at different plant sites or other satellite locations or by individuals, employees with P cards. And so it's that transactional activity that doesn't come directly through and managed by procurement. Secondly, it's purchases that may be too small to be handled by procurement. These are some very, very busy folks who are constantly responding to the demands of the business. And so there's some purchases that may just be too small for them to manage. And for the sake of today's conversation, I am going to set the level of $250,000, which of course can vary from one company to the next, but purchases that are less than $250,000 are predominantly going to be in the tail, and you'll see that in a little bit. And then lastly, it's the tailspin transactions constitute a considerable portion of a company's total annual spend. In fact, it can be as much as 80% of the volume of transactions that are being handled on an annual basis. 80% is a large number. and it is the majority of your spend. And if that's what's in your tail, then it is going to be problematic, and you'll see why. So why is it so important? Because it leads to a significant amount of waste, right? If the procurement professionals are managing and handling this sheer volume, it's going to take them away and their attention away from other higher value things. And these employees that are dispersed amongst the corporation making purchases, those transactions are not leveraging the total buying power of the company, right? So you're potentially draining tens of millions or tens of hundreds, that's, depending upon the size of your company. You're potentially draining that out of your company's coffers. And I know that's not something that anyone wants to knowingly do. And then in addition to a lot of dollar waste, it exposes your company to much greater risks. And risks with the companies that we talk to and solve problems for every day is as important, if not a greater importance, than saving money. Risk means that you're out of compliance with certain vendors, or that your supply chain is non-compliant with your terms and conditions, and therefore potentially putting you at risk. So a lot of good reasons as to why tail spend is so important, and why we felt it important enough to spend an hour of your time today. So now that we know what it is, let's move on. I want to show you on this slide what we call the tail spend sourcing model. This is the way the industry really looks at how you're spending your dollars. And so we've segmented it out into 4 different areas, and we'll talk a little bit about each area just to make sure that you're fully understanding of each particular segment. So the largest segment of the spend is the negotiated spend, right? These are the larger dollar, higher value negotiated contracts that the procurement organization is putting in place every year. They're working with preferred suppliers. Those suppliers all have negotiated rates, negotiated prices, negotiated SLAs, and other terms and conditions that they need to adhere to. And so that's why you see negotiated spend underneath the big yellow portion. And that's really where you want as many of your lower value purchases as possible. You see, that's like $1 million and less. So it doesn't even constitute the big purchases that are made with the large suppliers every year. This is all part of the tail. And if you see riding on top of that yellow piece is what I call the hidden tail. And the hidden tail is spend that is made with existing suppliers, those who are in that yellow box, but outside of the negotiated contracts. And so either individuals within the company who are buying on their own don't realize that these suppliers have negotiated contracts and pricing, and so they are transacting business outside of that. And what's happening is potentially you're not availing yourself of the larger discounted pricing that is in place, because if you were, it'd be part of the negotiated spend. And so hidden tail is very insidious, and it's sometimes hard to notice, but it is an area that can really drain company coffers. And then you move on down into the head of the tail, right? The purple section where you have your low dollar sourcing. And remember, on an earlier slide, I mentioned 250,000 as really kind of the beginning point for this discussion of your tail spend purchases. So these are the purchases that are not strategically sourced, right? Or else they'd be in yellow, and that they could be better leveraged. There's enough of volume in this head of the tail that if you put it together and did more business with some more significant suppliers, you would probably drive your costs down because you would be leveraging that total spend and you'd be getting a bigger discount. And you also want to start throwing some of that low dollar sourcing into the negotiated segment. So that's the head of the tail. And then we move into the middle of the tail, the green, where you've got lots of spot buys going on. I'm talking about potentially thousands and tens of thousands of transactions on an annual basis that may be 50K or less. Lots of transactional activity that needs to be done by the procurement department. Lots of time, lots of wasted expense in this part or the middle part of the tail. So there's lots of opportunities for increased efficiency there. And then as you continue to go off to the right or into the tail of the tail, very, very low value. We look at some of our corporate customers and see that there's, for a very large global corporation, they've spent $357.29 with a supplier in IT. And, that was that one transaction that happened with that one supplier and the same amount of work to get that transaction processed from procurement to payment is the same amount of work that has to be done for larger, higher value. And so the intent here is to try and lessen the volume in the middle and the tail of the tails because it's purely transaction processing. There's no real negotiations going on there.
Okay, Avis, so you've given us a lot of information about what tailspin is, and I'd like to take a quick moment and do a poll and to ask our audience, which segment of your tail for your organization do you think has the greatest opportunity for improvement? And I'll go back to the previous slide to set the context for you, and I'm going to launch the poll. And if everyone could vote one time for me, is it the hidden tail, the head of the tail, the middle of the tail, or the tail of the tail? Or maybe it's all of the above. I see some votes coming in. We've got about 33% of the folks voted so far. Almost 70% have voted. Um,
And how do they vote again, Liria?
yes, they're coming up right now. The hidden seems to be winning, and it's really close to the tail of the tail. I would say 30% and 30%. The hidden and the tail of the tail seem to be the most prevalent, with a little bit in the regular head without the hidden part, and a little bit in the middle. But it's really showing up that it's that hidden part, that area up here that we talked about, that hidden tail, and then tied with that is the tail of the tail. How does
Okay.
that shape up with what you know, Avis?
That is pretty expected. Yeah, it's very important that companies feel that hidden tail and the tail of the tail are the two areas that are better managed with more efficient processing in place, especially on the tail of the tail because it's so highly transactional.
Mm.
If processes are efficient and non-redundant and very much understood and segmented, there is a way to bring about some greater efficiency, even in the tail of the tail.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, we're going to keep moving on.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about what the tail is and the different segments of the tail. So now I want to make sure that you can readily spot whether or not you indeed have a tail problem, because there are some very specific telltale signs of a problem tail, and here's some of them. First one is you have more suppliers than employees. Now we have a range of attendees today, from small companies, medium-sized companies, and very large global corporations. And so it's probably more prevalent in the smaller to mid-sized companies that you would have more suppliers than employees. But that, and it might seem funny,
Mm-hmm.
But that is a very real scenario. And that's one telltale sign that you have a problem. And then less than half of your transactions are being done with your preferred suppliers. There's a lot of time that goes into negotiating contracts with preferred suppliers, setting those preferred suppliers up, vetting those preferred suppliers, and then only to have half of your total purchases going through that channel is a huge waste. And so that's a very significant sign that you have a tail problem, because that other half, or just as many, are being transacted without the benefit of those negotiations. And then less than 70% of your orders are negotiated by procurement, which means the other portion are not negotiated by procurement. And for your company, those are the experts. They're the ones who know how to get the best deal for the company at all times. So that's another problem, that you have a tail problem. Then more than 65% of your suppliers are providing only 5% of your total spend. That is a very large number of suppliers providing a very small percentage of your total spend. Those numbers are totally skewed. And then you're adding new suppliers almost at with every particular need that comes from the business. You're off really finding and identifying new suppliers. And sometimes you're adding as many as 10% new suppliers every quarter. That's a lot of work being done um, for a little gain. So those are your problems signs that you know you need to pay some attention to the tail. And then what are the challenges that you can face from an out of control tail? And let me just stop and say that this is a very common situation. That's why there are companies who are in business to address this and help their customers to solve these problems, because it is so typical. I can't tell you how many companies have gotten this right, because there are way too many more who recognize that there is work to be done there. So there are challenges that you're facing probably on a daily basis. And the first one is that your procurement professionals are so busy responding to the sheer volume of demand from the business to procure goods and services on their behalf, that they don't have the time to analyze and address the root causes of the problem. So they're just in fire mode, putting out fires, making sure that the business users don't have to wait too long to get what it is that they need in order to run their part of the business. And so when you don't have anyone looking at the real underlyings of the problem, you're never going to be able to address and improve them. And then secondly, the large and growing number of suppliers in the tail make it very difficult to manage them effectively, because again, they all have to go through a process of vetting and even issuing purchase orders to tail spend suppliers takes work on behalf of the procurement department. And so it makes it unwieldy, the fact that you've got thousands and tens of thousands of suppliers potentially in the tail makes it just unwieldy to manage effectively. And so potentially you're leaving money on the table because you have limited time to better negotiate. You got to get to the next one and the next one and the next one. And then page 2 of challenges is the fact that purchases are made throughout the organization, which makes it impossible to grasp really what the whole situation looks like, right? You have, or procurement may not even have visibility into all of the purchases that may be getting done external to the procurement department. So if you can't see it, you can't fix it. And then strategic higher value tasks, as I mentioned already, are going undone because they take a lot of time to accomplish. And if your business is like mine, it's moving fast, especially because I'm talking about IT transactions here, right? Hardware, software, cloud, telecom, infrastructure, data center. All of these things, technology in and of itself is moving so quickly. A lot of companies have their eye on transformation these days, and those are the higher value tasks to negotiate and put in place some of those transformation projects that are simply either they have to go undone or the millions of smaller transactions that the business needs to function are going to go undone, or some combination of both. So what's happening here is that unfortunately money is seeping out the back door every single day, or as I like to put it, it's money is going down the drain.
Hmm. That's good stuff, Avis. How
Thank you.
about we take a moment and just do a check-in with folks and allow them to ask some questions or pose a comment. And remember, you have the chat box down in the on the right side of your panel. And I will check the dashboard. Again, we welcome your comments or questions. And I do see one question coming in that wants a little bit more detail about the hidden spend. Avis, can you go back to that a little bit, the hidden spend?
Oh, sure. Would love to. In fact, if you can bring that graphic up again, Lyria, to
Sure.
look at the segment of the tail.
Uh-huh.
And the hidden tail is what I call the most insidious because it's hidden, right? And it's harder to spot. But if you take a look at it, it's actually riding on top of the negotiated spend. So it has a great opportunity to get included down into that negotiated spend because these are the transactions that are being made with the preferred suppliers. So there are already existing suppliers in your system. They already have existing negotiated pricing and other contracts in the system. However, there are transactions and purchases being made with those existing suppliers that are not taking advantage of the negotiated contracts and rates. They're just as if they're reaching out to the suppliers for the first time and saying, you know what, I need this. I know you provide this. This is how many I need. Please provide them.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a price. And typically it's not going to be that negotiated large volume annual demand price. It's going to be that spot price, which is going to be higher. And
Okay.
so, yes, that existing supplier will absolutely want to fulfill your need, but they're going to do it at a price, if it's not negotiated, and that is beneficial to them. So that's your hidden tail.
Mm-hmm. And Avis, while we're still on this slide, another question was about small purchases. How do
Mhm.
you go about determining a small purchase? Is it based on category they're asking, or is it a dollar amount, or what other criteria would you look at?
Well, when we look at customers' procurement history, each one will dictate what constitute the beginning of the tail, the head of the tail, what constitute a small purchase or one that can be done on a P card. Each company is different. And so we're just making some generalities for the purpose of this discussion. But spot buys can be, as you see on this slide, less than 50,000. You may give a certain class of employees and managers within the organization the ability to make spot buys up to 50,000 without going through a lot of processing and approvals. It's already been pre-done.
Mm-hmm.
And there could even be a spot buy desk, if you will, or a spot buy portal through which those spot buys are
Mm-hmm.
made. But then when you go down into the tail of the tail, those are really, really small. And it begs to question, why are there so many small purchases that are being done as opposed to Well, we know we're going to need that over in that department in this business unit. And I understand that you don't get visibility into the needs of the business in a lot of advance notice to be able to maybe bundle some of those spot buys or low dollar value purchasing together. But if you establish um, suppliers who can absorb those spot buys with an anticipated annual volume and associated discount level, you'll be much better off than
Hmm.
finding new suppliers each time. Mhm.
Okay, okay. And then we had one last question, and that was about, based on your experience, Avis, what would you say is the percentage of companies that have a problem managing their tail spend?
Oh, that's a high number, Lyria. That's that's a very high number. I would say still in the 80 to 90% of companies that we interact with or come in contact with, invariably they admit to having a problem with their tail and want to do something about it. So I think tailspin challenges are pretty much the norm. It's those companies who recognize that they can do better, there's opportunities for improvement, are the ones that we typically have more engaged conversations
Hmm.
with.
Okay, well, we're going to move on,
Okay.
and you're going to start telling us a little bit about the different procurement models.
Oh, my pleasure. Now, we've talked a lot about what tailspin is and what it looks like along the continuum, but I want to step back for a minute and get our attendees thinking about how their procurement organization is structured at their individual companies or organizations. And I've outlined here three different procurement models because invariably everyone falls within one of these three. The first one is the fully decentralized procurement model, in which every individual business unit, function, department, or geographic unit is responsible for its own purchases and developing its own procurement strategies. And there is absolutely no oversight of a central purchasing division, department, group, so that everyone's doing their own thing. I call that the Wild Wild West.
Hmm.
And then you have almost the mirror opposite, the centralized procurement model, which there is a single procurement centralized department that drives all purchasing through and all purchasing strategies and procurement strategies through. Because at the end of the day, you're creating a large economies of scale and efficiencies and standardization. And if you follow that train of thought out, you know that those are the things that lead to lower costs and better mitigated risks, right? But what we're seeing today and over the last couple of years is this new model, which is called center-led. And this is a procurement center of excellence. And I know a lot of attendees on the webinar today understand that center of excellence scenario in whatever function it might be. But a procurement center of excellence is one that is responsible for developing the organizational supply chain strategies and best practices. And so you have a single body of procurement professionals who are creating the path and for the rest of the organization to follow. They may not do the individual purchasing and procurement. That still may be left to individual business units, but those individual business units are going to do things in the same way. So you've got standardization, you've got the same strategies and processes in place because that's the purpose of the Center of Excellence around procurement. So those are your three procurement models.
Okay, well, I thought it would be a good idea again to just tap into our audience and do our second poll. How is your procurement organization structured? Are you decentralized? centralized, or center-led. So just so you have the definitions again, and I'll go ahead and launch the poll, and if everyone could just vote once for me. Are you decentralized, centralized, or center-led? We've got about half of people voted so far, and we look like we're centralized. Still waiting for a few more votes to come in. About 70% of people have voted. Centralized is still quite far ahead. And it looks like that's all the votes we're going to get right now. Oh, there's a couple more coming in. And it is still centralized winning. So we've got 71% voted at centralized, and decentralized and center-led are tying at 14%. Hmm.
Oh,
So it seems like most are still very much centralized, Davis.
okay.
Any thoughts
Well,
on that?
yeah, that's pretty typical. I want to draw your attention to a recent survey that we've taken a look at, done by Procurement. And in it, they asked almost 200 corporations to define their procurement operation between decentralized, center-led, and centralized. And in their survey, 47% of the respondents defined their operation as center-led. Close behind them was centralized. And so I see that that's in line with today's attendees. 41% of those respondents define their procurement operation as centralized. And then a far distant third are decentralized still,
Mm-hmm.
decentralized, about 12%. And so I see that as a great trend, leaving the decentralized wild, wild west behind, because there's so much opportunity for so many bad things to happen, right? Spending
Mm-hmm.
too much, enduring too much risk, not having enough time. Things are all done different in different ways. And there's no way to get your real arms around that until you begin to look at things from an enterprise level. So um, I think our attendees today are pretty much in line and should be congratulated that their operations are centralized. That's a
Mm-hmm.
good step.
Mm-hmm.
Would encourage them to take a look at that center-led model to
Mm-hmm.
see whether there is any additional opportunities for improvement available to them.
Okay. Well, we're going to keep moving on. Avis, I know you wanted to talk about what are some of the benefits when a company starts to manage their tail spend.
Yeah, I always try and ask myself when I'm sharing information like this, um, so what? You're doing things the way you're doing them. It's getting done. It may take longer. You may not know if you're saving money, but so what? It's getting done. Why? Because change is, it's work. It takes work and it takes commitment. But I have to tell you that there are a tremendous amount of benefits from reining in your tail. And number one is cost savings, right? We have found that companies that transform their tail spend management begin to realize some good savings, anywhere from 10 to 20% from spot buying alone. And they can start to achieve upwards of perhaps 85% of their total spend being strategically managed. And as you remember, the strategically managed part of the tail is at the left. And so companies are starting to just move more and more purchases to the left. And then consolidating the supplier base is another huge benefit, because it not only reduces the amount of time that you're spending um, negotiating and vetting and managing this huge volume of suppliers, but it also enables the procurement folks to focus on larger contracts. So here you're doing more with fewer suppliers. Those contracts can be larger. The discount levels can be higher because of the larger volume. And so it adds a lot more value to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then there's such improved visibility into the procurement process when you do these kinds of things, because it can help you spot and identify opportunities for continuous improvement. Continuous improvement continues to drive costs down
Hmm.
and efficiencies up. So there's more benefits, right? Another one is increased compliance. And I talked about risk before. Increased compliance from both the business users with the procurement policies and terms and conditions, as well as from the suppliers with their negotiated terms and conditions. And so once you drive compliance up, especially around software licensing, right, that compliance is a huge indicator of whether or not you're putting the company at risk. So compliance and lowering of risk, because that shaking out of the supply chain can actually prove helpful in reducing the amount of unreliable suppliers or those who have performance issues, which drives your risk up. And then what I like to say is that by bringing your tail under better management, you are able to better rein in your rogue spending. And that rogue spending we talked a little bit about before, it's spend that you don't know as a procurement professional that is happening outside of your purview, right? Any user with a corporate credit card can decide, I want that piece of software, and go on and download it. And if there are no parameters around how that needs to happen, or that still needs to come through procurement, then you're really not leveraging. You're missing an opportunity there, because all of those individual transactions collectively adds up to significant volume. And then there's more. You know, I left this one for last because it's such a big deal, and that is increasing your customer satisfaction. You know, we all know as business professionals that we have external and internal customers, and that we need to satisfy both of them. It's not enough just to have external customers satisfied. I've heard procurement referred to as some big black cloud or black hole. Things go in, but they never come out, or it takes months for them to come out. And so, that's a sign of not so good customer satisfaction that you really want to improve upon. And the way you can do it is by implementing easy to use systems for them to use. It gives you clarity, or gives them clarity around who's responsible for what within procurement. It really does reduce process cycle times, and it gives the procurement personnel the ability to learn new things and cross-train and basically get upskilled. So lots of benefits from managing your tail. So in summary, I just want to let you know, and we've talked about all of this, but increasing and expanding your strategic sourcing part of your tail is of utmost importance in the process of managing your tail spend. It really does provide you an optimal way to address your company's needs. And so you want to look at your current procurement model. Centralized, I heard a lot of centralized, still a little decentralized, and make sure that that is the optimal way for your organization to be managing procurement. If you've got a lot all down the continuum of your tail to the right, then chances are you're not leveraging your full buying power. Imagine the cost savings you can implement by leveraging your full buying power. Consolidating vendors saves time, money, and value. And I know that when I talk to procurement professionals every day, one of their chief goals is to be able to return value back to the organization. And this is a great way to do that. And then less rogue spending means reduced risk and greater compliance with your terms and conditions.
Okay, Avis.
Stop there.
Thank you for that summary of all the benefits. And I thought this would be a good point, again, to have questions or comments posted in the chat session. So should you have a question for Avis or just a comment you'd like to make or an observation, please share that with us. There were a couple of things that came in during this last segment, Avis, and one of them was around that whole idea of rogue spending versus flexibility. And the question is, how do we get the rogue spending under control, but we still give people flexibility?
Well, that's a good question. There are all kinds of processes and tools and portals and et cetera that can be put in place so that individual employees feel as if they have that they are empowered to make small purchases when they need them, but they're going to be doing them or under the auspices of procurement, because procurement has provided them the way to do those. And so there is a way to do that with lots of tools that are available and processes that can be put in place in advance, and then allowing your employees or training your employees on how to follow those guidelines for everyone's benefit. So there is a way to get that done.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And we had another question, how do you start managing tail spend? And I think that's something you're going to be addressing in just a little bit. If I could defer that question just for a few minutes, and we will get back to you on that one. And we did have one about bundling. It's a little bit of a tactical question, Avis, is how do you decide to bundle vendors? What criteria goes into that?
Well, I'm not that much of a big fan of bundling for bundling's sake, meaning that you're just going to drop everything into a single bucket or two. I think that that's putting the organization at risk. But um, what I'm talking about is really assessing your procurement history, say over the past year, 18 months, 24 months, and really assessing that procurement history, understanding who your hardware suppliers are, how many of those are there, what kinds of hardware are they providing, who are your software suppliers. I know there are a lot of direct relationships still in place out there, the Oracles, SAPs, etc., but there's still a lot of VARs and resellers at your table, feeding at your table. And then making some decisions that we don't need 10 suppliers providing us the same types of things. Why don't we bring that down to a smaller number? Have them compete, that smaller number, all of them compete for a spot in that smaller space, and drive our discounts up, because now there's a bigger piece of the pie to
Mm-hmm.
compete for. So when I'm talking about reducing your supply chain, I'm talking about doing it in a systematic way that's going to drive your discount levels up and your numbers of suppliers down, to make it easier to effectively manage them. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then finally, there was a question about a tailspin management program. Can you describe what is a tailspin management program?
Not sure what you mean by program. Are you talking about software, or are you do you think they're talking about um,
I, I
systems?
Mainly, I think it's relating to not necessarily software, but when you talk about putting in a tailspin management program in your organization,
Ah,
what is that?
okay. I just talked a lot about it. That you're taking a look and basing your decisions on establishing better processes on historical information. So that's how it starts. Even to answer that other question about how do you start a tailspin management program,
Hmm.
you really have to understand what you've been buying and how you've been buying it over a period of time. And I like 12 months at least. I like to see 12 months, because then you get an annual view. And some years, of course, are going to be skewed or different because of major projects, etc. But there's still a lot of things that happen every year in IT, right? Whether it be software licensing, whether it be maintenance, whether, whatever it is, whether it be procuring new products and services. There's a lot of the same things that happen every year. So we need to understand what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
We need to make some decisions based on that data on maybe who your key suppliers are. And I'm talking about in the tail. So you leave the bigger suppliers where they are. But if you just really want to get your arms around the tail,
Mm-hmm.
there's hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers. What are each of them providing you, and at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can begin making decisions from there.